Hi, welcome back to my read-along of A Tale of Stars and Shadow. Today we're up to chapter 30. It's going to be a big one, so let's get right into it. Okay. Raindrops stung Talyn's face as she stepped outside. Wind gripped her cloak, ripping the hood from her head. Rain immediately soaked her hair. In quick, practiced movement, she pulled it back and tied it neatly before tugging the hood back over her face. Halun moved into a run as he led the wolves east toward the rush. They settled into a distance-eating jog, their hard-won conditioning allowing them to keep up the pace easily. Her feet splashed through puddles and mud as they moved through a series of darkened back streets for what felt like an interminable period. Eventually they moved onto an area of high ground that lined the river. A steep stone levee dropped from their feet down to the swiftly flowing water below. There was nothing like it on the opposite side, where ramshackle and run-down homes and shops ran almost all the way to the banks. The Poor Quarter. Small fishing boats, surely the lifeblood of many of the quarter's residents, rocked wildly against their moorings. The rainfall had swollen the waterfall cascading over the wall to their left, turning the rush into something chaotic and powerful. Dismay clutched at her at the sight of it already flooding its western banks and inching towards the buildings. Directly below it lapped against the levee, still a good distance down. The wide bridge connecting the poor and market quarters remained well above water level. "Theak," she shouted over the sound of rushing water and rain. "You said something about sandbags earlier. Where's the best place to start?" "The storehouses are back in the dock and wall quarters," he bellowed. "Too far away for us to be able to carry enough of them here to be effective." "It's too late to slave the slums, but what if we sandbag Wharf Street?" Corin suggested. "That's the road leading from the bridge onto the residential area of the market quarter, and from here that's the path the river will take if the water floods the levee." "The water isn't flooding the levee anytime soon," Zamrel disagreed, the wind catching his words and making them hard to understand. "There's still time to help the poor quarter." "The residents know the river is flooding. There's time for them to make their own way out," Theak barked. "We can't be sure of that. It's late. Half of them will be asleep already. And what about those too young or old to move quickly, or too far from the river to notice how high it's rising?" "The poor quarter is a third the size of the city," Talyn was ruthlessly practical. 5 of us cannot make enough of an impact." "We don't need to," Halun shook his head. "The eastern half of the poor quarter, right up to where it hits the eastern headland of Feather Bay, that's all on high ground. We just need to worry about this western area where the land is so low. That's a much smaller area to cover, Captain." Talyn caught movement in the corner of her eye and pointed it out to the others. It resolved into a flying tiercelin, buffeted by the wind. He struggled his way over, eventually landing beside them. "I found the Falcon. He agreed to send some of the patrol back to the city." Tiercelin's musical voice was barely audible. "They're on their way down the wall road as we speak. He also told me that since we're technically off duty, we are free to do as we please." That was better than nothing, Talyn thought quickly, weighing Theak, Halun, and Zamrel's words. "The city patrol can start sandbagging Wall Street while we help the people here. Tiercelin, can you fly those instructions to Ty?" While Andrus was only a watch officer, she trusted him to want to do the right thing. If he couldn't convince his senior officers, she judged he was also resourceful enough to work out a way around them. At least, she hoped he was. "Why would he listen to me?" Tiercelin balked. "Tell them the request is from me," she said. "Do your best, Tiercelin, then come back here." Tiercelin nodded sharply and leapt into the air, fighting his way back towards the city. She turned to the others. "The rest of you, can you swim?" "We're Dock City humans," Zamrel said scornfully. "Of course we can swim." "How do you want to approach it?" Theak asked, looking out over the steadily rising river to the poor quarter homes and shops. "Follow me." She ran for the bridge. Already people were moving out of the slums, and they had to duck and weave, forcing the pace. Once they reached the other side of the bridge, she moved off the road and away from the foot traffic, the wolves gathering around her. Raising her voice to be heard, she issued her commands. "Until the waters rise too high, we'll work on foot. We aim to warn those who cannot get out on their own and help anyone sick or unable to walk unaided, starting with those closest to the riverbank and working backwards through the area Halun described." "Theak, is there a central place in the city to send everyone? Some place on high ground where it will be warm and dry?" "The town hall," he said. "It's big enough to fit hundreds of people, and it's in the highest section of the city, near the wall. There are stores of food and blankets there too." "Perfect. For those you are able to warn, tell them to head for the town hall. Yell if you get into difficulty and need help. Any questions?" There weren't any. The urgency of the situation had wiped away their disgruntlement and poor attitudes, revealing 4 men who were accustomed to difficulty and hardship and knew how to keep a straight head in a crisis. She hadn't seen that in them before. Her initial instincts had been right about each of them. No matter how little they wanted it, they might one day make excellent protective guards. She forced an encouraging smile to her face. Let's go. Halun launched into movement, his big strides quickly carrying him away from them. Corin and Theak weren't far behind. Zamrul moved to follow them, but Talyn reached out to take his arm. You know this area, correct? He nodded, meeting her gaze unflinchingly. I grew up here. Even with the smaller area to cover, 5 of us isn't enough to help everyone, not once those banks completely burst. If you grew up here, you know where to find those in the Shadowhawks network. She figured they were also accustomed to working under pressure and would likely know the area and its residents even better than Zamrul. And when lives were on the line, she would use any resource available to her. Some of them, not even an attempt to prevaricate, not in a crisis, despite the risk to himself admitting it caused. Her estimation of the thief went up. Find them. Tell them to start running, warning as many homes as they can farther back in the quarter. You were right before. A lot of them will be sheltering inside, unaware the banks are about to burst. Everyone in the western slums needs to get out, or at least move into the eastern half of the quarter where the ground is higher. He nodded. I can do that. Good, go. Tell them to hurry, Zamrul. Talyn moved to follow the wolves, but Zamrul's voice stopped her. Captain? What is it? Thank you. There are even folks in Dock City who wouldn't bother with the slums. Nobody is more deserving of help than anyone else, Zamrul. Now go. The wolves were already a good distance ahead. She ran after them down the incline, sloping away from the bridge and onto the main street running along the river's edge. Here water already covered the ground, lapping at the bottoms of her boots and turning the surface into a muddy bog. People clogged the road, moving out of their homes and shops in a steady trickle. Theak was checking through the houses right on the river, so she turned right, into a narrower street. The surface under her feet was muddy and uneven, a sewer running down each side. The homes were built from wood, most constructed unevenly from whatever materials had been available at the time. Not all had complete roofing. She reached the end of the street and banged loudly on the door of the last house. When nobody answered, she pushed open the unlocked door and glanced inside. It was empty, its occupants already gone. In the next house along, an old woman sat huddled in her bed, staring fearfully out the window. Is anyone else here? Talyn asked gently. She shook her head vigorously, looking up at Talyn with worried eyes. I can't walk very well anymore. I thought it's safer to stay in here where it's dry. It's not safe to stay. The river is flooding. Talyn held out her hand. Come with me. I'll help you get somewhere safe. The woman stared at her for a long moment before pushing off her threadbare blanket and stretching out her arm. Talyn grasped the fragile hand and helped the woman to her feet. Once she was ready, Talyn took the blanket from the bed and wrapped it around her thin shoulders. With Talyn taking most of her weight, they inched their way back up the street towards the bridge. Tirslin was just landing. He was soaked and shivering, but his shoulders straightened when he caught sight of Talyn. The city patrol are headed to Wharf Street, he said. I couldn't find Ty, so I just went straight to the group the Falcon sent down from the Citadel. Good work, she approved. This lady can't walk unaided. Can you fly her to Town Hall? The woman shook her head, every inch of her turning stiff with reluctance at the sight of one of the winged folk. She huddled closer to Talyn. It's all right, Talyn murmured. He won't hurt you. Where is he taking me? The woman's trembling voice was barely audible above the wind and rain. Somewhere safe and dry. It's going to be okay. Talyn shot a look towards Tirslin. Help me out here. What about my house? She started sobbing, a frail, wretched sound. It's going to be all right. Tirslin stepped forward to gently take her hand. You'll see. I'm going to take you somewhere warm and safe. He smiled then, flooding the woman with his winged folk beauty even in his bedraggled state. All right now, you just have to hold tight to me. That's right, don't let go. Talyn stayed only long enough to see Tirslin grip the woman tightly and launch into the air before turning around. On her way back along the street, she passed Theak herding 2 small children. A strong wind had kicked up, flipping her cloak so the driving rain got underneath, soaking through her coat and shirt. The next 2 houses on the street were empty, and by the time she got to the 4th house, the water was rising above her ankles. She glanced down toward the river. It was flowing freely over the banks, the entire road along the bank now underwater. It was beginning to collect debris and send it flooding down the streets too, bits of wood, plants, and other rubbish. Rain continued to fall, and the waterfall roared. Dread clutched at her chest. This was going to get much worse before it got better. She waded through murky water in the next house, helping a mother and 2 children out and up to the bridge. The mother was sick, racking coughs shuddering her too thin frame. Talyn didn't like leaving her to make the trek to Town Hall unaided, but something told her there would be others in worse condition, and she wanted to preserve Tirslin's strength for them. In the distance was Halun, his bulk wading easily through the water, a shivering man in his arms. He'd found a makeshift raft from somewhere and was dragging it behind him with a piece of thick rope. 2 young women sat on it, soaked and pale, faces tight with fear. Corin shepherded a group of beggar children out of a ramshackle building close to the riverbank. More residents were making their own way out as it became obvious the water level was going to keep rising, and they saw the wolves escorting people to higher ground. "Could we use boats?" Talyn asked Talyn when they came together, liking his raft idea. "I thought of that, Captain, but most of the fishing vessels moored nearby have either been washed away or are too large to use in these narrow streets, and looking for others could take a lot of time." The water had soaked through Talyn's boots and added weight to her legs as she waded back through to the final houses in her street. Many of them were derelict and hadn't been lived in for months. She waded from door to door, calling out for anyone who remained. They were all empty. "This one's done," she shouted to Hulun as she waded back out to the main road. He nodded, voice lifting over the waterfall and rain. "Then we've cleared all the streets leading off this main river road. We can start moving further back." Fiat came sloshing over before she could go anywhere. "Look!" She and Hulun both glanced up at the bridge where Theak was pointing. People were streaming onto it now, all coming from farther back in the quarter. Parents carried or led children, older folk supported each other, while others moved under their own steam. All were soaked and shivering, most of them too thin and not properly clothed, but they were alive. "Someone's warning the rest of the slums." Hulun's voice rang with relief. "That's Zamaral's work." She couldn't help her smile. "Come on, let's make sure nobody gets left behind." She rescued 2 small children before the water rose to her waist. Shivering racked her soaked body. Despite the physical exertion, the wind was growing cold, and so was the water she was wading through. When next she saw Talyn, he struggled. He'd continued to fly those who couldn't walk unaided to town hall, and she wondered at the strength it must take to battle the strong winds while carrying the weight of another human. His grit bolstered her, and she waded determinedly back further into the porequarter. Several steps later, she was almost knocked off her feet as a wave of water rushed right up to her hips. She gasped at the cold of it, then gritted her teeth and pushed open the door of the next house. This one was empty too, though she wasted precious time slogging through waist-deep water to check every room. A heavy object, a wheel torn from a cart it looked like, hit her in the legs as another wave of floodwater washed through the front door when she attempted to leave, knocking her off her feet. She went down, water rushing over her head, choking as muddy water ran down her throat. It took a few seconds to get her feet back under her and then lift her head clear. The water steadily continued to rise, and her teeth were beginning to chatter. Talyn checked the final house on the street and found it empty, before struggling back up to higher ground, where Talyn stood at the bridge, trembling. His arms were wrapped tightly around himself, hair slicked to his skull, great grey wings bedraggled. "It's rising too fast," he said. "I don't think you're going to have time to check them all." Talyn glanced with dread down at the cold, dark water that inched higher with every second that passed. What terror must anyone still left in the quarter be feeling? Movement caught her eye. Corin staggering up, one arm around an elderly man hobbling along gamely beside him. The stream of people from further inside the quarter had slowed significantly, but 2 men were dragging a small boat down from the bridge and onto the water. Once they were on board, they began rowing towards a series of buildings Talyn and her wolves hadn't gotten to yet. "Shadowhawk's people," Zamaral said at her side, having arrived without her noticing. "They'll deal with the southwestern area. We just have to focus on this part." "I'm going to have to start swimming," she said, pulling off her heavy cloak and unlacing her boots. The tunic went too, until she was clad only in her wet shirt and breeches. "Damn, it's getting cold." "We've been colder before," Sari's voice offered cheerfully, before disappearing as quickly as she'd come. They had. Even now it was more the change from such thick heat that made her feel cold. Compared to winter in the Twin Thrones, this was balmy. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," Talyn said worriedly. "What about the debris? The current looks like it's only getting stronger." "It's not over yet," she said. "There could be more people trapped down there." "The captain's right," Corin added. "Living in the porequarter doesn't make them worth less than anyone else. We can't save everyone, but we should go on as long as we can." Zamaral simply began yanking off his boots. Talyn nodded. "You get them out of those houses, and I'll get those that can't walk to safety. Deal?" The 3 of them smiled at the winged man. "Deal." Talyn stepped forward to take the man Corin was leading, and then lifted into the air without another word. Corin saw Talyn had stripped and began doing the same. He didn't miss Talyn's concerned look. "Don't worry, I spent my boyhood free-diving in the bay with my da for fish. I'm a strong swimmer." His confident smile was at odds with his soaked, shivering frame, but it lessened her concern nonetheless. Together they waded back into the water. As soon as it reached her chest, Talyn began to swim. It was easier to maneuver this way, and faster too, though she was forced to expand extra energy on avoiding the various debris being carried along by the floodwater. She swam towards the houses most in danger, diving under the water to get through the door and then surfacing inside the house. There was a man in this one, but he was already dead. floating amidst a tin cooking pan and a wooden basket. His skin was blue. Talyn's heart clenched in despair, but she had no choice but to leave the body there and keep looking. She ran into Theak a few moments later. He had stripped too and was swimming, clearly looking for her. They tread water in the middle of the street. She hoped she didn't look as blue with cold as he did. "I've just been up on the clear ground," he shouted. "It's going to get too dangerous down here soon. Once the bank bursts completely, the river will turn into rapids, and that's going to make this flooded area a whirlpool of dangerous currents, especially if the wind doesn't die down." She nodded. "We'll keep going as long as we can." "Captain," his hand reached out to grab her wrist, "we are responsible for the safety of our wing." His words checked her like a slap to the face. She wasn't a Callanan warrior responsible only to her partner anymore. She couldn't use the lives of her wing as recklessly as she might use her own. Guilt hammered at her, along with a surge of fear of making another mistake. "You make the call when to pull them out," she said, meeting his eyes. "I'll trust the decision to you." "Aye, Captain." He let her go, and they parted ways. Talyn swam into another house. Her teeth had stopped chattering, which probably wasn't a good sign, and her limbs were becoming sluggish. One look at her hands showed blue, wrinkled skin. Gritting her teeth, she forced the lethargy away. Then she saw the small boy. He was struggling, trying to keep his head above water, but beginning to tire. Talyn surfaced beside him, and her heart clenched at the look of utter relief on his face. She took a strong hold around his waist. "Can you hold your breath while we swim under the door? It won't be long." He nodded, eyes fixed on her face. She smiled reassuringly at him and kicked down, taking him with her. She swam as quickly as she could out the door, then surfaced on the other side. The boy started breathing again immediately, though his teeth chattered with cold. Back where Talyn was waiting, the water was now up to his knees. He took the boy securely in his arms and smiled in reassurance. The boy smiled tidily and snuggled into his chest. "Wait until I return before you go back in, Captain." Talyn gripped her shoulder, forcing her to meet his eyes. He looked haggard, his face pale and wet, eyes showing dark shadows. His arms and shoulders trembled with the strain of carrying so many people. "You're too cold. Stay out a few minutes and warm yourself up, or you'll be no good to anyone." He was right, reluctant as she was to admit it. She busied herself rubbing arms and legs vigorously, restoring warmth as much as possible in the wind and rain. Halun appeared, sloshing out of the water. He carried a woman in his arms, and a girl hung off his back with her arms locked around his neck. Clinging to the waist of his pants was a skinny youth. Theak, Zamrel, and Corin were behind him, leading or carrying another 3 people each. "We've got them all," Theak said wearily. "This lot are the remaining inhabitants. They'll all go on to shelter together at some place they thought would be safe." "The Shadowhawks people are out too. It's getting too dangerous even for the boat," Zamrel added. "I think we've covered as much as we can. We just have to hope those living on the eastern side of the quarter have stayed on high ground." He stood with his head hanging, shoulders sagging forward. Theak and Corin were hunched over their knees with pure exhaustion. Talyn felt like doing the same. Halun stood tall, a tower of strength. "Take a breather," she said. "We'll escort them up to Town Hall together when Talyn gets back." It wasn't long before Talyn appeared in the sky, battered about by the wind as he fought to fly a steady course. This time when he landed, he was out of breath, his entire body trembling. "That's it," she told him. "Why don't you take a break from flying and walk back with us?" "Sounds good," he gasped, waving a hand when she gave him a concerned look. "Just catching my breath." They had no sooner begun walking over the bridge when a man came running towards them from the direction of the city, eyes wide with what looked like panic. He was middle-aged, too thin as with many of the folks she'd seen tonight, his brown hair plastered to his skull. "My babies," he cried. "Have you got my babies?" They were all momentarily frozen by the man's approach, minds sluggish from cold and exhaustion. All except Halun. The big man stepped forward and laid a hand on his arm. "What's wrong, sir?" "My babies." He was distraught. "I left them. I was working in the city tonight. I left them here at home. Did you find them? Where are they?" "How old are your children? Tell me what they look like," Halun commanded gently. He scrubbed at his face, struggling to focus. "Twins, 10 years old. They both have blonde hair, curly, too long, it always needs cutting." He took a shuddering breath, as if realizing he was rambling. "Their names are Michael and Lana. Please tell me you found them." Talyn shot a questioning glance at the wolves. She didn't recognize those descriptions. They shook their heads too. "They must still be down there," she said quietly to Theak. Her second nodded and turned back to the man. "Which house do you live in? We'll go and get your children for you." "That one." He pointed to one of the houses, only 4 blocks back from the river. The water was almost up to the roof. Talyn cursed inwardly. How had they missed it? "I'll get them," she said quickly, sharing a look with Theak. It was too dangerous to allow anyone else to attempt. "The rest of you head to Town Hall." "It's too dangerous," Theak said flatly. "I'll go." Theak, I'm Callanan. I know you don't understand what that means, but trust me, I've been trained for situations like this. I'm ordering you to leave. I'll see you up at town hall. Captain, Corrin raised his voice to capture her attention. There isn't enough time. Look at the waterfall. The cascading water was now at least triple its usual volume. On the western bank of the Rush, the river had risen over halfway up the levee. There was no more eastern bank. The river had turned into a churning beast full of debris and powerful currents. It flowed down into the Porkwater, seething around buildings and streets alike. Go, she shouted. That's an order. She didn't stay to argue further, wading back into the water and diving under before coming up and swimming strongly towards the house the man had pointed out. A distant roaring sound came to her ears. The rapids were getting worse. She dug deep, increasing her speed. The water lapped at the roof of the house. She took a deep breath and dived down, seeking the doorway with her hands. Eventually she found it and swam through. Her breath burned in her chest and spots danced before her eyes. She kicked upwards, desperately seeking air. Finally, her head broke through, mere inches from the ceiling. She looked around, seeing nothing in the living room. Another few gulps of air and she was diving again, heading for where she hoped the children's bedroom would be. She swam for what seemed like forever in the black water, eventually surfacing in another room at the back of the house. There were two dark shapes in the corner. Shouting the children's names, she swam towards them. A small cry answered her back. She came up beside them, relief flooding her. Are you all right? We were waiting for Pa to come and get us, the twins chattered over each other in their fear and exhaustion. So we were floating, like he taught us in the ocean. I'm going to get you out of here. She summoned a reassuring smile for them. I want each of you to grab my shirt and don't let go. The wall shuddered and a fear spiked in Talyn. She managed to get the children out the front door and then looked wildly around. The flooding waters had turned into a raging torrent. There was no way she was going to get herself and two small children back to high ground before it hit. One of the houses nearby was larger than the rest, its roof still above the waterline. She made sure the twins were still holding on tight, then towed them towards the roof. Can you climb up there? She asked, trying to keep the urgency from her face and voice so as not to panic them. Her teeth chattered loudly and her limbs were growing numb. They nodded, afraid despite her forced confidence. Lana went first, her feet digging into Talyn's shoulders as she climbed up and onto the roof. Michael followed after. The twins huddled at the edge, arms wrapped tightly around each other. Climb up to the highest point, Talyn shouted as the onrush of rapids screamed towards them. As high as you can. Hurry! It hit Talyn before she could climb onto the roof too. The force of the rushing water slammed into her body, tearing her away from the house. She struggled, then cried out in pain as her knees slammed into something hard and unyielding. Water was everywhere, over her head and rushing into her mouth and nose. She choked, spitting out muddy water, and tried to float, but the water was too rough. The fierce current held her in its grip, and she wasn't strong enough to swim out of it. Again, the water covered her head and she had to exert all her strength to struggle back to the surface. Her reserves of strength were almost gone. She'd fought hard against the current for what seemed like full turns now, and the cold had sapped the energy from her muscles. Her head began to sink again, and she didn't have the will to rise. Her arms struggled weakly for a few moments, but then she began to sink, water running into her nose and mouth. Blackness appeared at the end of her vision. Realization finally hit that she might die here. Without thinking, she opened her mouth to shout Sari's name, instinct telling her that her partner would be nearby, already coming to help. Instead, water rushed into her lungs. Because Sari was gone, dead because of Talyn, because she'd been overconfident. That knowledge was crushing, and for a moment she stopped fighting entirely, the absence of her partner a deep, gnawing grief, a hole in her chest that would never heal. Her eyes slid closed. And that is the end of a very epic chapter 30, first cliffhanger end to a chapter. Don't worry, we'll be back soon with chapter 31 to see what happens to Talyn. If you'd like to avoid spoilers, please jump out here before I jump into the author commentary. If you are leaving us here, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll bring you chapter 31 very soon. Otherwise, let's step into the next room and have a chat about this chapter. Okay, chapter 30. What an epic, action-packed chapter. I'm grinning right now because this is about the fourth take I've done of this author commentary. I could not get those words out straight, but I've managed up in this go, so let's forge ahead while my words are working. So yes, a very big chapter, lots of action. The monsoonal rains in Dock City are caused the rush to break its banks and flood the Porkwater. What that means is hundreds, if not thousands, of people living in that area of the city will lose their homes, if not their lives as well. the wolves under Talyn's command go down there to help, essentially. And for the first time, Talyn sees a different side to the men under her command. Like her, they throw aside all their other considerations, the fact that they're despairing about the LA game, the fact they hate the fact that they've essentially been chain ganged into this unit because lives are at stake and they want to help. And this is the first time she's really related to them because that is how she sees the world and faces the world. And that's what she's essentially been trying to preach to them. And then this is the first instance where they've been put in the same situation and they've responded in the same way as she has. And for the brief moments she has time to focus on that in the midst of all this chaos happening, she really, that heartens her quite a lot. Particularly Zamrel, who throws all caution to the wind, is happy to risk himself, and essentially is the reason why a good portion of lives were saved because of his ability to go and warn the Shadowhawks people and rouse them and get them happy, get them up and roused and ready to help as well. That's the first cliffhanger ending we have for this chapter, but of course, spoiler alert, we know Talyn survives. We know she's about to get rescued by a very interesting individual, the Shadowhawk. She's called his people out into the night, and that hasn't gone without him noticing, and he's come down to the city to help. Fortunately, just in the nick of time for Talyn, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in the author commentary for the next chapter. But yeah, this is the first time that the wolves bond, the very first, those fundamental chains of bond, those bonded chains that form what the wolves are, heart and soul, for the rest of the series. This is the first step in that. Talyn had the instinct about them that first day in the jail when she pulled them out of the pardonable cells. She knew that this was coming, even though she didn't know what form it would take. And here we are in the middle of the monsoonal rain, in the middle of the night and the wind, all banding together for a common purpose to try and help as many people as they can. This is how the wolves become the wolves, and it's a pretty cool origin story, I think. Really looking forward to reading more of that in the next chapter. But if you have any questions or comments on this one, please drop them in the comments below. I'd love to chat about it. Otherwise, also please consider liking and subscribing on your way out. That really helps me. But I look forward to seeing you for the next chapter. Another epic one, I'm sure. Have a great day, guys.